What's up, YouTube? WinterGuard here. So today's video, we're going to get into a little more in-depth review of crafting. It's obviously still not going to cover a lot of the nuances to the system, but we're going to touch base on some highlights, and hopefully it will help you create better items and know what to keep, what not to keep, and maybe make you a little bit of currency along the way. So let's do it. Alright, before we get too far into this, I just want to show you guys where my progression is. I am currently at level 73, so this is my first character. We are nowhere near getting into the extremely end game. We are doing maps now. I'm up to tier 4 maps, and nothing extremely difficult. I am gathering a lot of materials and items to try and craft with, which is going to be the basis for this video. But as you can see, I am not that high level, 73, and as far as what I've been able to accumulate so far, we're doing pretty decent, I believe. I feel like I'm doing pretty decent. We're at 120-ish exalted. I got a divine and a bunch of all the rest of them. But I'm going to show you how you can accumulate a little bit of currency without really being in the end game. This is noob level stuff. I 100% say I'm a noob, but I feel like I'm doing pretty good for a noob. So we're going to pass on what little knowledge I have, and hopefully it'll be useful. So here's where we're going to start with what I think are kind of the stats that you're going to want to look for as you are crafting. So this is going to apply a little different per item slot. So obviously what you're looking for on a weapon is going to be different from what you're going to have on armor, gloves, boots, whatever. There's going to be different stats that apply, and I'm going to kind of touch the basics for each slot, and it'll hopefully help you in your crafting so that you know what to look for and what to pass on when you're doing your crafting. First, before we get too far into anything, so as you can see, as you're looking at your stats, obviously you can get up to 6 plus whatever's inherent on the base item itself. But if you hit Alt, and this is PC specific, and I'm sure there's a hotkey for this on console, there are, on the right, you'll see a T number, T2, T7, as you can see on this item. These are the tier of the item stat, of the stat itself. Each stat has a tier ranking, and it goes from 1 to 13. 1 being the worst, 13 being the highest, best range of rolls you can get on that specific stat. So as you can see on this item, the first one, the spell damage, is a tier 2. That's really low. That's what I'm using, but that's really low. And as you can see, it also has a tier 7, which is the mana, which is above average. It's a better roll, as you can see, 118. And that's how the stats will accumulate. And it's based off of the item level that determines how high of a tier stat you can roll. Obviously, if you're an Act 1 normal, you're not going to drop an item that has a tier 13 stat roll on it. It's just not going to happen. But obviously, as you increase in level and difficulty, the tier stat rolls have a higher chance. You have a chance of getting the higher tier stat rolls. It's still not going to be a 1-for-1. Like, you could still drop an item in doing your high maps that could potentially have a bunch of tier 1 stat rolls on them. It's still random. But at the top end, as you go higher up in item level, you will get the chance to get the higher tier rolls. So we're going to start with the weapon slot. And as you can see, I'm not using a very good weapon. Again, I'm level 73. I'm still trying to find one that meets the criteria of what I'm looking for. So we're going to touch base on some of the base stats that you probably want to look for in your crafting to use your higher tier orbs like your exalted to add mods to a particular item that you're crafting up, because you don't want to waste an exalted orb, adding a mod to an item that already has really bad mods on it. It's kind of a waste of time and resources to do that. So this is how I approach it. Let's look at a different item. So let's look at this quarterstaff for a minute. So this is one that dropped as is. As you can see, it has the basis for some okay stats. One of the main things I look for on weapon slots are the plus to level of skills. Now for this one, this is a quarterstaff normally used by a monk, so melee skills is kind of the priority. You don't necessarily have to have that skill or the plus skills for it to be a good weapon, but it's definitely one of the top tier stats to have on a weapon itself. It exponentially increases your damage versus just plus straight percentage to damage increase. The plus skills is kind of what the basis for whether I'm going to craft an item or not. So as you can see here, it does have +3. That's low on a two-hander. You could get up to +6. I've seen people mention +7. I haven't seen it, but +6 is what I've seen the highest on a two-handed weapon. So depending on your level, so like this is a level 55, it's a mid-level. +3 is probably still on the low end. But it also depends on if you're going to try and trade it or if you're going to use it. If you have a +2 and this one pops up and it's a +3 and it has some decent stats on it, maybe use it as burn a couple exalts on it to try and get some stats to up your damage on your character. It's probably not going to be tradable. It's not going to be worth what you put into it, but for self-use, if it's an upgrade, it's an upgrade. So in this case, I'm seeing +3, and if I'm looking at it from a trade point of view, I'm not going to dump any more into it. It's just not worth upgrading and using the exalts, because the best you're going to come back with is probably an exalt. And there's some other stats here that are missing that we're going to touch base on. So we got the +3 to skill. From there, you want to look at percentage damage increase of whatever. Like for this, you're probably looking at 2 potential percentage damage increases, one being elemental and one being physical. This one has neither, so waste an exalt to try and get that to roll? Probably not. So I would leave this and probably just throw it in the disenchant pile. So take for instance the weapon I'm using. Again, this is not that good of a weapon. It has the +3, but it also has 58% increased spell damage. So that's the kind of stat that you're wanting as a basis for moving forward on whether to craft or not. Now again, this applies specifically to weapons, where when you're looking for the plus skill and the percentage spell or physical or elemental damage increase. Other stats to look at, like for this one, has the crit hit, which is a really nice stat. I'm running a shock build, so the chance to shock is a big stat for me, but that's not going to necessarily apply across the board. Mana, plus to max mana, plus to max life, life regen, mana regen. Those stats are really nice ones to look at, and there's some other ones obviously in there that would apply depending on the build. But as far as the basis for crafting, I would stick to some really basic stats before advancing or using crafting materials to try and roll more stats on. And for weapons, for me, that is the plus to skills and the plus to, or the percentage increase to damage, whether it be spell or physical. So let's look at body armor next. This one's going to be pretty basic. There's not going to be some crazy stats that you're looking for here outside of the norm, obviously, again, build specific, but what I normally look for is max life, max mana, any of the resistances. Energy shield is a nice one. You can add sockets, so I wouldn't worry about the sockets. And again, like regen, life regen, energy shield, mana regen, those are stats that you would probably look for on this. Obviously, there's going to be other ones, but I tend to try and limit my criteria for crafting to having some really specific base stats before I invest crafting materials. All right, if you look at the glove slot, this one's going to be slightly different, and I don't have it here, but for gloves, there's one of the stats I see people tend to look for is attack speed or cast speed on the gloves specifically. Now, obviously, the other stats are going to come in as well, like this one's got crit. The max life is always nice, plus to damage, energy shield, the usual suspects. But for the gloves specifically, you will see people looking for attack speed / cast speed as one of the stats on their gloves. Again, not necessary. If you get some really high tier rolls on some of the other stats like crit or life or mana or energy shield, any of those where you're getting a, I want to say probably for trading, probably tier 6 and above, and some people might argue even higher than that. Specific to gloves, there are stats outside of the norm that you would look for on gloves. Keep that in mind. Okay, for boots, let's talk about boots. For me, and this might apply as well to other people, I look for increased movement speed. Again, this is specific to the boot slot. The movement speed is kind of my personal criteria for what I'm looking for as one of the minimum stats on the item. And then again, from there you move into your resistances, your life, mana, any of those other stats. But for the boot slot, because there's so few movement enhancements in the game, the move speed on your boots to me is kind of a minimum criteria. The higher the better, of course. All right, if we look at the belts, belts is kind of a weird one for me. There are a lot of extra stats that you might see roll on belts that you won't see on other pieces, and they tend to apply towards the flasks. I honestly don't pay a ton of attention to them, and I might just be gimping myself in that fact. But I tend to look at just again the regular stats like resist, life, mana, energy shield, regen. Well, actually, I don't know if energy shield rolls on the belts. They probably do. But I look at the belt as the same as stats for the body armor. And then you'll see some extra stats that will roll on these. Normally, like you see flash life recovery, increased flash charges. That's specific to belts. So, and then you also get your charm slots. So a little bit of different nuance on the belts, but I tend to still prioritize the basic stats like resistances and life and mana. Okay, so let's look at the helmet next. Now the helmet again has some different nuance to them. Again, you're going to still be looking at the same stats that you would probably see on other gear, but, and I don't have it here, but on helmets you can get +2 skills on certain things. So that is something also sought after specifically to helmets. I don't know if I have any here. No, these don't have them. But you can get, I've seen plus to minion skills and a couple of other ones. So you can get plus skills on the helmets, so keep an eye out for. The plus skill stat on the helmets is increases the value of those quite a bit. Okay, I was thinking about doing amulets and rings, but that is a whole different creature unto itself. For now, let's just say keep an eye out for the basic stats that I've just been mentioning on other pieces. But there's a whole different game that's played with rings and amulets, so probably do a whole different video on that. I will say this, if you get any white rings, especially if they are of a higher quality, keep them. If for nothing else, hang on to them for now, because people are looking just for base white rings, especially of higher quality and of certain colors. It's a whole different ball game, so just for now, keep a hold of those, and until you get more information, I'll try and do a whole separate video on that. Okay, to cap it off, I'm going to do one more thing. So I have this base armor. It's kind of a weird one, but just for the sake of the video, I'm going to hit it with a couple of exalts and see what it rolls. As you can see, to me, when you get a item that splits the stat requirement, and what I mean by that, you'll see that it requires 51 strength and 51 intel. I don't like playing around with those types of armors. or items just in general, because most people when they're putting points into their passive tree, they're doing it for their primary stat for the character, i.e. if you're running a sorceress, you're going to dump it in intel, and you don't want to put points in strength, you want to up your intel. So when you get a base item that has that split stat of 51 strength, 51 intel, I don't tend to mess with them. But in this case, it's rolled some okay stats, so we're going to hit it with a couple more exalts just to see what it rolls. So as you can see here, the max life rolled a tier 7, which here's how I approach crafting. If it's above a 6 or 7 as one of the base stats, I tend to, and one of the useful stats, I tend to do a little bit of crafting with it until it hits something that it's just not worth moving forward. So you see the max life is a tier 7. The energy armor and energy shield is a tier 4, but then you got a tier 7 intel roll and a tier 7 fire resist roll. So this has got some good got a good starting point. So we're going to slap this with a couple of exalts. Well, we'll start with one. Usually what I do is if it rolls like a tier 1 garbage stat on an exalt, I just stop there. I'm not going to bother going forward. But we got a good basis here, so I'm going to slap a couple of exalts and see what we get. So next stat, lightning resist. Good stat. Mid roll, I'm going to guess tier 5, 6, 5, 6, 5, tier 5. Not bad. That's still, this would, if I hit this, I would keep going. So even though the base is kind of wonky, hitting that stat, I would go, okay, we'll hit it with one more. Okay, this one rolled a last garbage stat. As you can see, it rolled a 12 armor, 5 max energy shield. That's tier 1. That, to me, that throws it in the disenchant bin. You know, listing it, at the best, you might get an exalt for it, but I already threw 2 in it. Maybe somebody hunting some high fire resist might look at this, but then we got the stat requirement, which was kind of weird. Me personally, I don't know that I'd even list it. I would probably just chunk it in the disenchant and keep going. But, I mean, that's the game. Crafting is a gamble, and I've hit a couple really, really good gambles and have cashed in on that in the trade. I made an armor that I did sell for a divine, which is right now is worth 120, 130 exalts. The market's kind of weird right now. And honestly, I think I undersold it because I got responses back really quick. So I probably should have stepped back and upped the price on it. But it is what it is. I mean, I'm happy with the divine, but I don't want to talk about what I could potentially have gotten because that's the past. Anyways, we'll leave it here for now. If this was helpful at all, I'm going to create a Google Doc, and I'll throw it in the description of some of the base stats that I'm looking for on each piece. And if you guys have some ideas or some comments on adjustments to the document, we will make them, and hopefully it'll be something that becomes more and more useful as we move. I haven't found a good, reliable site that has the information. I've seen bits and pieces everywhere, but we'll create a Google Doc and adjust it accordingly. But we'll leave it here for now. I hope you enjoyed it. As of the recording of this, it's January 1st, so I hope everybody has a great new year, and looking forward to pushing through on POE 2. But for now, keep on farming.